Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Soraya.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? Tonight, my guests are the Snake Brothers.
How's it going? Glad to be here.
Wait, do you guys have names?
Snake Bro. Hey.
Is it just A and
My name's Kyle.
Oh, it's just not A and B?
Right.
Yeah. My name's Kyle, and I'm the younger brother. I'm also on the right.
That's right. And I am Russ. I'm the older brother. I'm on the left. And
In the studio.
In the studio.
In case you're watching.
Yes.
Except there's no video.
Right.
And
Sure.
I'm hearing you in mono.
Well, we're sending it to you in stereo, guy.
Well, guess what? That changes over Skype.
That's right. Yeah, it does.
Kyle and Russ, the Snake Bros.
Right.
So what I want...
From Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
Yes, excellent podcast, guys.
Thank you.
And tonight, I just kind of wanted to do a freeform sort of show with you guys, talk about a bunch of different stuff. So weren't restrained by one particular topic. But one of the things I wanted to start with, because I was curious about you guys' thoughts on this. You do a lot of stuff on ancient history and stuff like that.
That's right. Yes.
What are your thoughts on ancient aliens?
So when we first started the podcast, we were very seriously looking at this idea because, and we love Ancient Aliens, the show, first of all. Mm-hmm. I really like it. I like it because, and I think I've said this on your show before, but because of the way that it takes people to explore the mysteries of some of these ancient sites, and then of course they always end up saying, could it be aliens? But initially what's great about the show is the exploration of the mysteries. So, but we were looking more at, I don't know, there's just strange depictions, I think, in ancient art, even all the way back to rock art, where you see stuff and you're like, what are they trying to show me here? And, so like we're fascinated, of course, with petroglyphs and rock painting, rock art of ancient peoples. And you'll see these, they have this enormous tableau of like all these animals and figures, and some of the figures are really weird looking, and you're like, okay, maybe that's just an interesting way to paint a person, but then there's always normal people in that same painting, right?
Yeah.
So it's the juxtaposition to like where you're seeing, okay, that's a normal guy right there, whether he's a stick man or he's a more complicated, colored, complex, painted figure. But then over here is this weird thing with multiple arms and halos around its head and horns coming out, and and you're like, what is going on? What are we looking at? And then even in some cases, objects in the sky where you're like, okay, what is that thing in the sky in this ancient painting? So I don't know what to think about the idea of paleo contact, I guess is one way to call it. I do think it's totally possible. I don't think it's necessary to explain ancient structures like they do on Ancient Aliens, but I don't rule the possibility out, and I don't see any reason why some kind of contact with, beings from, whether they're from another world or they're just otherworldly is in terms of like spiritual in some weird way. I mean, it's possible that aliens could be contacting us and have been for 40 or 50,000 years through this other realm and of the mind. So I don't know. And then, viruses, like what are viruses and why do they fall onto the planet from space?
Right.
Are they aliens? Is this some kind of control mechanism? Because viruses are basically little machines that go in and start messing with your DNA. And they're constantly editing things and moving stuff around in down there in your cells. And so, what is happening there? Does that point to like a something that's going on in terms of life in the greater universe, or I don't know. And then of course there's the idea of panspermia, and then directed panspermia, the idea of directed panspermia is that this was on purpose. That some incredibly, almost unbelievably ancient and very, very distant civilization started sending out little packets of information targeted towards star systems that would likely have planets in order to seed them. So there's lots of ways that the quote unquote ancient aliens can come into the picture. And I think they're all very interesting.
Yeah. And there's the idea of ancient astronauts, which is what I think before the show.
Yeah.
A lot of these people that were looking at this possibility, that was kind of the catchphrase before the show changed it to ancient aliens. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of the figures going back to the rock carvings look like guys in space suits.
Yeah.
Basically. So the idea that they could have been other people from different parts of the planet that were contacting lesser advanced civilizations using flight. So they came from the sky, and you look at all the myths about beings coming down from the sky. They were anthropomorphic. They looked like humans, but they were a little different. Maybe they were shining. It could mean different races or something like that. And then you throw in the fact that the Earth was inhabited by multiple different hominid, species,
Right.
That probably looked very different.
Yeah.
That they were coexisting with Homo sapiens sapiens at the time, and so much catastrophic things have occurred on the planet since these beings inhabited it that perhaps most of what their civilization could have been has been wiped away. So it doesn't necessarily have to be aliens, but again, as Russ said, it's not ruling it out, but not necessary to go there to explain what we see.
Yeah, and there's also the question of and I think they point this out in some of the earlier episodes of Ancient Aliens, who are the snake people and who are the ant people that are talked about. And there's even drawings of these people, and they are said to live beneath the surface exclusively. So that's interesting. And would you call them aliens? In some cases, the myths say that they're not from the sky. They've been here longer than we have. So they may be actually terrestrial, and we're the new guys, on the scene. So
yeah, and I love the virus idea.
Great.
I think Orson Scott Card.
I think Soraya would be mad about that because he's pretty sick right now.
Oh yeah, probably. but Orson Scott Card wrote a book about this idea, and I guess he was maybe the first science fiction writer to present it in this way, which was an alien species that was like a virus. The way they communicated was by editing DNA.
Right.
That was their language, and so they were and this was part of the Ender's Game. It was later on.
Oh, okay. All right.
After Ender's Game, like this Ender's going around these different worlds, and he's taking the
it's the first set of sequels to Ender's Game.
Okay.
And later he wrote the second set, which included the other ones that were more like Ender's Game initially. So
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's going around these different worlds and studying these creatures, and yeah, that was one of the deals. The creatures on this planet that were intelligent were getting really sick and dying in this strange way, and they were trying to figure out what it was. Turns out they were getting this virus, but the virus was rapidly mutating and doing all this stuff, and it kept acting differently, and it was responding to the way they were trying to treat it. And it's been a long time since I read the book, but basically they figure out that it's actually an intelligent alien species that's trying to communicate with the other life forms on this planet in its own normal way.
Right. It's trying to say hello, and everyone's dying. Yeah.
Wow. I'm not familiar with that one. That's interesting.
Recently in the news, scientists have possibly discovered a protein molecule in an asteroid that fell about 30 years ago. And they've written the paper. It hasn't been peer reviewed yet, but they obviously have gone public with their findings. They found other precursors to life in meteorites and stuff coming from space before. I can't remember. There's like three main ones. some I can't think of the acid. What's the
amino acid?
Amino acids and other things like that. But yeah, they think they found this protein molecule. So, hey, you never know.
Interesting.
It's very ancient. And it's alien.
Well, my introduction to the whole ancient alien thing wasn't even, I think when I was growing up, I saw the occasional TV special that mentioned it. But it wasn't, whatchamacallit, who's the main ancient astronaut guy?
Daniken Giorgio Tsoukalos? Okay.
No, Daniken. So
Tsoukalos is awesome. Come on, guy.
Daniken, like I said, maybe I saw some TV specials, but I never read any of the books. To this day, I've never read any of the books. But there was one, oddly enough, my grandmother gave me, and she was very religious. So it was called Gods and Spacemen in the Ancient East. And it kind of took the biblical model and kind of went, what if this was not what it seems? You know, what if this was ancient alien contact? It seemed weird for my grandmother to have this book.
Yeah.
But she gave it to me and I read it and I was absolutely fascinated by it. Because it would talk about, stuff like in the Mahabharata, how we have some similarities to nuclear weapons described and stuff. And then it talked about the deserts where is it Techites? Is that what they're called?
Tektites.
Tektites, yeah. Where it's been fused to glass, and the only place that we see that is on the Trinity test site where we exploded the first atomic bomb. But now they're saying that's probably meteorite strikes that caused that.
Bolide explosions in the air. Yeah.
So, I mean... Yeah. But it was a lot of interesting stuff I knew nothing about. And actually, I had a weird experience while reading it where I was somewhere maybe 16, 17 years old. And I was sitting downstairs because it was a thunderstorm, middle of the night, reading the book. And suddenly I felt really weird. Like there was a lot of lightning. I felt really weird. I went into the bathroom and I had a streak of white in my hair. Wasn't there before. And it's still there to this day.
Huh.
No idea what the connection is, but it was just one of those weird. I have no explanation for this.
Yeah, I have a big streak of white on the back of my head that just basically kind of goes diagonally across the back of my head.
Really?
It's a little splotchy, but the hair is just white and really, really fine, and it's been there since I can remember. But
I scared the crap out of him when he was little, and he's had it ever since.
I've had some. I think we talked about these before. Like I had some pretty crazy, weird hallucinations and stuff that I remember.
Right.
From my, childhood days, the salad days.
I get random patches of white hair that will then, like if I shave them, like I'll get it in my facial hair, for instance. And I'll shave it, and it'll come back normal.
No, I need to try that. I've got some gray hairs on the beard right now. I need to give it a shot.
It's not like normal gray hair. That's the thing. It's like, and the funny thing is, like when I was younger, people would be like, "Oh, you're streaking your hair," and I'd be like, "I didn't do anything to my hair." And then as I got older, people are like, "Oh, you're going gray," and I'm like, "No, it's been there since I was 16."
Yeah, you're like, "No, I'm streaking my hair."
Yeah, guy. Exactly. But go ahead.
No,
go ahead.
I'm actually was going to ask you the same question. I'm interested to know where you stand on it, what you think about the ancient alien idea.
Yeah, so that was my first take on it, which was from what I've understood looking back on it. Like I've never reread that book. I actually got rid of it and then got it back at a used bookstore because I'm like, why did I get rid of that? That was actually pretty cool. When I look it up on like Amazon and stuff, people are like, well, this is like Donikin stuff, but a little more grounded. And I'm like, maybe that's why it clicked with me.
Yeah.
And I kind of didn't follow it too closely after that until I came across Sitchin. And there was an article, I think in Fate magazine, talking about Sitchin questioning the marks on the inside of the relieving chambers. Saying that the pyramids were much older and that those marks were put in when they opened the relieving chambers and so on and so forth. And I didn't know who Sitchin was, so I picked up, I think his, not the Eighth Planet, but the Eighth Planet Revisited. Mm-hmm. And the thing that interested me the most on that book, like he's talking about what he's saying the Sumerians are saying the galaxy or the solar system is and everything, and how Nibiru came in and hit Uranus and knocked it on its side. And this was around the same time, a few years earlier, they had come up with, hey, Uranus looks like it was hit by something and knocked on its side.
Right.
And it's like, well, that's kind of interesting now, isn't it?
Yeah. And it does. It is 90 degrees. Its axis is completely 90 degrees to the plane of the ecliptic, which is really strange, even aside from all the ancient alien stuff and the things that Sitchin said about it, and even Velikovsky. But I have to point out that Venus also, it's not just on its side, but it's completely upside down.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Venus's axis is considered to be turned 170 degrees, which makes it almost completely turned over. And so that means that its spin around its own axis is quote unquote retrograde, going the wrong direction in terms of all the other planets. But actually, it's going the right way. It's just upside down. And
it's also very circular in orbit, isn't it?
It has a very regular orbit. It has the least eccentric orbit of any planet in the solar system. And the other thing that's interesting is Venus's day is longer than its year. So
I didn't know that.
It takes it a long. It spins very slow. Maybe that may be an exaggeration. It's got a very long day. I should say it that way. Huh. It spins very, very, very slowly, and that would be expected from a planet that's been flipped over. Right, yeah. It would lose a lot of its its spin momentum, its angular momentum from that flipping.
Or if it was a comet and is fairly new to the solar system.
Yep,
but that would be the lack of eccentricity of its orbit sort of is evidence against that it was a captured object.
Right,
captured objects should have highly elliptical orbits.
Yeah.
Right. Which I think the electric universe idea kind of puts that back into place, though, because it would have a more regular orbit at first as it's captured.
That can be true. Yeah. It's interesting because you have to. It's weird that other planets have eccentric orbits. Of course, the Milankovitch cycles of the Earth are caused by the changing of the eccentricity of the Earth's orbit in multiple ways, like in 3 dimensions. Like not only does how oval the orbit is of the Earth, it pulses in and out. So sometimes it's fairly circular and sometimes it's more oval. But that whole arrangement also rotates around the sun very slowly. And those cause the Milankovitch cycles, which, depending on where the Earth is in that orbit, in that system, like for example, right now, the southern hemisphere during its summer is much closer to the sun. Because that's how the orbit has shifted.
Yeah.
Right. So that also means that the southern hemisphere, when it's in its winter, is much farther away from the sun, whereas the northern hemisphere, we're close to the sun during winter and far from the sun during summer. But that whole system changes back and forth, and so why is that wobble happening? But Venus doesn't have one very much at all.
Yeah.
Except that it's been flipped over. What flipped it over? Mm-hmm. How can you flip a planet over and then also have it have a very regular orbit?
and I just did a quick search online about it, and apparently it's 0.1 degrees off of being circular, I think it said.
Wow. That's close.
Yeah. I'm sorry, just 3 degree axial tilt of just 3 degrees, and is the closest to circular of an orbit with an eccentricity of less than 0.01%.
Yeah.
So it is,
or you could say that
almost completely
the
circular.
axis is 177. Sorry.
And anything you look up, it basically, like I'm looking at these articles, and they're all just basically telling you that this is the case without really any explanation as to what would have caused it.
Yeah.
Oh, and here it is. I was right. Venus orbits the sun once every 224.7 Earth days. But its rotational period is 243. So its day is longer than its year.
Wow. It's almost like a moon to the sun.
Right.
Huh, yeah.
Like our moon's day is just as long as its orbit.
Right.
So then I got kind of interested in Sitchin stuff. Started reading more of Sitchin stuff. And to me, I feel like there's something to some of his stuff. Like he has some interesting stuff in there that seems to relate to stuff we've discovered, but in other parts is just completely fictional on his part.
Right.
And I think
too much speculation.
Yeah, and I think I got to the point where I couldn't take the speculation anymore. I'm kind of like, okay, you seem like you were kind of onto something a little bit, and then you just went, you decided you knew what happened and filled in the blanks.
Yeah.
Which happens,
Yeah.
I would say one of the things that I got from reading his stuff is the actual more detailed descriptions of Uranus and Neptune that he apparently, or as he claims, he translated from the Sumerian texts. He got these descriptors from these texts and had written them down and published them. And sometime later, our first probe went by those planets and we got our first up close look at them, and they matched the descriptions that he had exactly.
Right. So you're like, if he was writing fiction, he still got it right.
And if he was claiming that he could translate text that he couldn't, then how did he get this? It's like, so I'm skeptical of the skeptics. I know people, even Graham Hancock, who I have a lot of respect for, kind of trashes Sitchin and claims that he can't translate anything. And, I'm not sure about that. So I like his work.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the speculation is the speculation. So,
and Scott Crichton wrote a very interesting book talking about those markings in the relieving chambers, because apparently whatever Sitchin's claims were turned out to be wrong. And I know Graham is one of the people who looked into that and said no, these markings were legitimate and so on and so forth. Scott Crichton went and examined all of it and has come up with really compelling evidence that those markings are not legitimate markings.
Right. Yeah. And Graham actually initially in Fingerprints of the Gods was on Sitchin's side.
Yes.
He sort of, what he did, this is what Graham does really well, is he reports on other people's findings, and then he kind of says, this is open to question, but here's interesting stuff that people have said about it, right? In other words, he's not sort of taking you down one road or the other, but he's like, so we all know the standard model story. Here's some people who aren't going with the standard model, and here's what they say. And, could this be true? And what, we should think about this more. And then later in Magicians of the Gods, he completely he just said, okay, I think these marks are legitimate.
Right.
But you're right. Scott's book is really interesting. And I've just never bought the Howard Vai's story of finding those markings. I think that he put them in there himself.
Yeah.
So,
and I think Scott presents a pretty solid case for that.
Yeah, especially because he goes through Vai's journals.
Yes,
and you see in the journals that like the timelines don't line up, and and the stuff he says on the days when they first open those chambers, there's nothing in the journals about any kind of signs or symbols.
And then he fires all of his guys, and he hires new guys, and it's like,
So,
and then he invites all the dignitaries out there, and he names all the chambers after them, and you're like, come on.
Right.
He was desperate.
Yeah.
To make a discovery. That's the way I see it. I don't
that's
know.
why we have Wellington's chamber and Lady Arbuthnot's chamber, and they're not named after Middle Eastern names, but they're named after British aristocracy.
I guess I didn't realize that. Huh.
Yeah.
It's shady. I mean, I'm not an expert on it, but I don't trust his work. I wouldn't consider it that it's not work.
And the stuff that's great that Crichton research seems to throw a lot into him being a fairly shady person to begin with.
Yes, he was a shady guy. I mean, he was busted for cheating on something. I can't remember what it was. He did something shady in British Parliament.
Yeah.
And he was also, they described him as a swashbuckling adventurer guy, or a wannabe swashbuckling adventurer guy who had he was commissioned in the military, but he basically went around and did his fake swashbuckling adventure stuff on the military's dole. So I don't know. It's really, really strange.
That's a good one. I've never heard that, swashbuckling.
Yeah.
You swashbuckler. I'm going to try to remember that one.
Never heard swashbuckling?
No.
Oh, yeah.
So that was kind of my next thing was Sitchin, and then I kind of dropped the Sitchin stuff, and I think Graham was the next. I got to the point where I was like, "There's nothing new happening with this stuff," and then I think I went down the path of finding Graham Hancock when his special came out, the 3-part special, which is what introduced me to his work. on whatever channel it was, History Channel or whatever.
The 3-part special on the Underworld.
Yeah.
Is that the one?
Yeah, I believe so.
That was fantastic. Yeah.
And I just had it on in the background, and I'm looking at it going, what is this about? Because I always have closed captioning on in case I miss what someone says. And I'm looking at it going, what's this about pyramids lining to Orion? Like, wait a second.
Yeah.
And so, after that, I kind of dropped the whole Ancient Aliens thing for the most part. When the series started, I liked it. Like, I thought it was done very well, especially considering how some of them have been done in the past. But I've also learned so much about this stuff where I'm kind of with you. Like, I don't feel it's necessary. We don't need to bring aliens in to explain all of this stuff. However, there are odd things. Like you have stories from Native American cultures about the sky people. You have
the star people.
And you got the same thing in Japan. You have stories about people who came down from the stars. And these are very consistent. So it's like, okay, did we have a spacefaring culture on this planet? Or was there something else going on where, who knows? Maybe Mars was inhabited at one point.
Right. Yeah. Didn't you've interviewed, what's her name? Artie Six Killer Clark.
Yes. Yeah.
And she did that whole book on the star people myths.
Yep.
I thought that was fantastic work. And that just shows she brought together so many, so many stories and old tales and mythologies and oral histories of all these indigenous peoples and native peoples that to talk about the star people and how some of them are descended from the star people or how they have interacted with the star people. And you're just like, okay, there's something going on here. There's something happening here. Obviously we're not prepared to say what it is, but I agree that there's, like Kyle said, some of the figures, that you see, you're like, what is that? I mean, even the Egyptians one, you like look at the busts of Nefertiti, you're like, what is that? What is that? Look at her head, what was the pharaoh? Akhenaten. He's a really strange looking guy. I don't know if I'd say he's an alien, but that is a weird looking person. And I've heard people describe, it's some kind of, it's royalty, and they had some kind of genetic disease or whatever. Because Tutankhamun, we have his mummy, and he's a weird looking guy.
Yeah,
you can. Anybody listening to this can pull up Google right now and look up Tutankhamun's mummy, and you can look at the shape of his skull. He had a long head. He had an elongated skull. And I've seen some explanations like, well, it changed shape, all the time it was sitting there but that's not true. Like other skulls don't do that.
Right, exactly.
So he had an elongated head. We don't have his father's body, Akhenaten. That's one thing that people have been trying to find for a long time,
or Nefertiti,
but both his parents, all the statues and busts and images of them show them with extremely elongated skulls. Yeah. And then, of course, we have the Paracas skulls. Now, so you talk about elongated skulls. Now, are these aliens? They, in some ways, resemble the popular image of aliens with these gigantic eyes and this weird big head. But I don't think they're aliens. They're definitely hominid. In every other way, not every other way. Their skulls they have many more strangenesses about them than just being elongated. Yes. They have the wrong number of skull bones, for one thing.
That's very strange.
Yeah, they have only a single parietal plate. They're missing some sutures, and the place where the spinal cord went up into the skull cavity is in a different spot than in regular Homo sape. So they're very strange looking. But you look at their whole skeletons, and they found entire skeletons of these people in Peru, and also there were thousands of them that came out of the Hypogeum on Malta,
which were lost.
Right, all lost. But their skeletons in general are human, right? So I don't think that they're aliens, or even they're not hybrids. I don't know what they are.
I think they're an offshoot.
Yeah, or just a brother species, or whatever you would call it. They're
If you were born in space and you came to Earth, would you be considered an alien?
If you were born, in space, you may not be able to come to Earth.
That's true.
Hey, but what's the definition? What are we talking about here? Because if there was a spacefaring civilization at some point in the past, and they went elsewhere for a long time, I see
what you're saying. Okay,
and then they come back here, can we call them aliens?
Right.
Well, I guess my rigid definition of alien would be they came from another planet.
The life originated from some other place.
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe not even a planet, but yes, they have to originate off Earth.
Because when you consider things like gravity and air pressure, if you were actually born in space with no gravity and such, you probably wouldn't be able to come to Earth. You would be crushed under that weight.
Right. You'd have to undergo even if you were born on the moon, right?
Yeah.
Which the moon has 1/6 the gravity of Earth. Your bone structure, your muscle structure, and everything, ligaments would not be able to handle Earth's gravity. You would feel awful.
Yeah.
You'd be in bed all the time.
And this is kind of going back to Sitchin again, but some of the descriptions of the Anunnaki and that they were hampered by the gravity here, and they were tired and laying down and depicted laying down.
Really?
And they were the work was too hard. They needed to use the hominids that inhabited the earth, that they could do the work. They were better suited for it.
Right.
So I don't know. And this is kind of funny because I'm recognizing my past biases talking about this, because when I was introduced to Graham Hancock, I had this huge, Ancient Aliens bias. I wanted it to be aliens that built these things and built these structures and did all this stuff. And when he was saying there's no need for that, I was like, come on, but then once I was more fascinated by the alien idea. And then once I really got into Graham's work, I actually became more fascinated by the idea that there is this vast history that we have just completely lost of ourselves. The whole collective amnesia type of thing. And that still captivates me today more. And when I think about the idea of, well, aliens did it all, and then the whole story we've been telling ourselves about our own advancement is true, that we just wandered around and were smashing rocks together for hundreds of thousands of years, and then aliens helped us out.
Right.
Yeah, that makes us like tweaks or whatever.
Yeah,
right?
It's like it's not as cool in some ways. I don't know. So now I have a different bias, I guess.
Yeah, and I kind of agree with that. I remember when we were first starting the podcast and talking about these things, and we were sort of fascinated by the idea that some of these ancient structures may not have been constructed by humans. And that was just a really interesting idea. But now to me, it's just as interesting, or even if not more so, that some of these ancient structures were constructed by hominids that we're not necessarily Homo sapiens sapien.
Right.
Yeah.
And there are numerous stories of giants building some of this stuff.
Yes.
Yep.
Plenty of the same oral traditions that talk about sky people and star people talk about giants.
Yeah.
So.
And see, Graham has like triggered me again with his latest book, because he basically, he didn't even talk about giants. And I was like, come on, man. I was so excited about the America Before. And then there was just not a single mention of giant skeletons.
Yeah. But I think also Graham is trying to come across as professional and acceptable as he possibly can, because of all the heat he's got in the past for bringing up ideas that turned out, like we were talking earlier, where he'd throw around other people's ideas, but then later say, no, this turned out to be wrong. He's the reason he started writing fiction is because he got so fed up trying to defend all his ideas and having to have 1 million footnotes to show where he got everything. And he's just like, with fiction, I could throw these ideas out there and I don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's really, that's sad to me that the skeptics or the critics out there can have that big of an effect on somebody like Graham, who is a great thinker, a great journalist, a great writer, that he can't free. It's like, because I've heard that idea before, that he feels constrained by the critics, and that's just, damn it.
Yeah, they've beaten him down. He's stepped out and took another risk and wrote another book or 2 more books on this subject. So he still came out, he's still working on it. But I agree. I think I felt like I was seeing, this is just my own opinion, but I felt like with America Before, I was seeing Graham's, he's being incredibly careful.
Yes.
and I'm just like, okay, I understand being careful because you want to present accurate information, but you're skipping whole pieces of information because you know how the critics will respond to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I was just like, well, it's still great book, still good material, but
yes.
Yeah.
However, I would say this: if you want, okay, so the stuff he presents in the book is stuff that's more established. It's more scientifically palatable. It's more likely to come across over the next couple of decades as being accurate. So if he were to throw in giants, the critics would go after the giants. They wouldn't go after this, and they would dismiss the book because it mentions giants.
Right.
So what he's doing is smart.
He's being smart. Yeah,
Yep, I agree.
I agree with that. And I was going to say too that yes, there is a greater goal in the body of his work, which is to begin that really difficult part of changing the paradigm, which is the beginning of changing the paradigm, right? Causing the establishment to question the standard model.
Yeah.
That is the hardest part. Once it begins, then, the doors are open. So,
and I mean, when we talked to George Howard about the work of the Comet Research Group, the guys who have who are doing the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, they've done the same thing. They've dropped the Carolina Bays from the greater hypothesis because it isn't as strong evidence and it's still controversial. Whereas what they're saying is that, look, we're focusing on evidence that's already been established in the standard model in terms of dating, right? So they get all their proxy information, all the proxies that they're looking for, the nanodiamonds and the glass spherules and the magnetic particles that are all proxies for large impacts from known archaeological sites that have already been dated and are well accepted by the archaeological community. That's where they're getting all their data, and they're like, look, all we're doing is looking through your samples that you pulled out and showing you, look at all these proxies that are right here in this particular layer that all of you have already dated and are well accepting as being right at the the Younger Dryas boundary. And they've dropped the Carolina Bays, which were included in the original theory because the Carolina Bays are controversial, and that's what everybody was attacking.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
and the standard and the establishment already has an answer for the Carolina Bays that they're sticking to.
right.
So it's a much more difficult argument to approach, and that kind of is I don't know if we segue here, but that idea, what Graham is possibly doing, that's what we're speculating, and then what we know that the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis group is doing is kind of the way it has to be done for the fringe in order to do this. So when we go, like you do a lot of work in the paranormal stuff, right? And you have a lot of people on you. It's going to be the same way for the paranormal research, to get into the mainstream of the establishment to be looked at seriously. Like there's going to have to be
Some bridge.
some element of study in that genre that is possibly part of the standard model, or there's already accepted parameters or something.
There's an overlap
I
somehow.
don't know that that's really going to happen, because even when you have peer-reviewed, accepted science, like some of the size studies, the mainstream still doesn't accept it because it doesn't fit their paradigm. It's never going to fit their paradigm because their paradigm doesn't work with the evidence of what's happening. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, you're talking about, like, when you say size studies, you mean like people, like what happens with people's experience?
No, I mean like studies in labs where they've shown that the mind can affect reality, or you can transfer. Psi is anything psychic, basically.
Mental.
Yeah,
Psychic. Yeah.
So
I was thinking more along the lines of some of the physical manifestations. I know, I'm sure that's a difficult thing. Everybody's trying to capture something.
You had that at the pair research,
can be tested.
the pair research facilities where they would have the I don't know how many balls they drop into this thing, and you should get a bell curve from it, basically. And if someone concentrated on more of the balls going on one side or the other, you would see that happen. It wouldn't be a huge difference, But the fact that
But it was enough.
is statistically, it is a very significant difference to say that that person's mind is interfacing with these balls, even if it's in a very small way. It doesn't matter if it's only a small way. If it interfaces, it interfaces.
Right. And I think that so the same thing is happening to the Comet Research Group at the Younger Dryas. There is a huge pushback. Of course, because this is not talking about psychic stuff, there's less pushback, right? But they have been fighting an uphill battle, and they're still fighting an uphill battle. And I would say that the majority of the scientific community is still either on the fence or against them on this subject. But you know, they are pushing their way through, and more people are coming to their side. And I think the same thing can happen with Psi. It's just harder.
Yes. Well, they got
to have good PR people too.
Yeah.
The thing with Psi is that the paradigm that molds our reality right now is that everything is materialistic.
Yeah.
And Psi does not work in that paradigm. So until these people drop this materialism paradigm, you're not gonna, no matter how much evidence you present, you're still gonna have people who deny it flat out simply because it doesn't fit their paradigm, not because the data's bad.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I feel like we're in a really bad place with the way the physics community or whatever, the scientists, the whole physics discussion and research is going in this totally, in my opinion, way off direction with quantum physics and all the mini worlds and everything that everybody's pushing, and it's all this weird materialism mixed with I don't even know what to call it.
Yeah. Materialism mixed with fantasy.
Yeah, it's yeah.
I mean, the mini worlds is or the multiverse. You're just like, there's no way to test that. It can't even be called you can call it an idea, but you can't test the multiverse or the mini worlds theory that you can't even, ideas in science need to be falsifiable to be able to be legitimate ideas that can be hypothesized and then tested and then, eventually become theories or be falsified.
Yeah, it's like a thought fad right now. Like everybody wants to think about all these. It's like all the physicists that I'm trying to learn, like what's on the cutting edge here, and everybody's talking about that.
Yes. Yeah.
Many worlds, multiverse, and then let's break it down into like minute details of how everything splits in every possible direction, and there's just everything is happening all at once. I don't know. It's just it's boring.
Right. And some physicists have talked about that they kind of don't like the idea that people come up. So you come up against a problem in physics, and what people do is just invent particles to solve the problem.
Oh, yeah.
Right. They're like, why people get Nobel Prizes for inventing particles that no one has ever looked at before, or even so this is
dark matter and dark energy.
Exactly. Some people have said, some physicists have said this is not a good direction for science.
Yeah.
That this is a kind of the god of the gaps. They're basically filling in the gaps with imaginary things
that they just assume they'll find because it'll fit their equations.
Right, because the model works.
It's belief driven.
Yes. Yeah, and I mean, all science is on some level belief driven.
Because it's driven by humans.
Yes, but this is sort of they've gone through all the hard science and they've come out the other side, and now they're basically talking psi. I mean, they're magical particles that no one's ever seen but must be there and interact with everything. Mm-hmm. Right.
Well, what was the thing I was just going to ask you about? I did want to get back to the Mahabharata in a moment. But the idea that the cave paintings and stuff, we're talking about the weird costumes and stuff like that we see in some of them that don't really make any sense. I mean, at least some of that can be held up as shamanic journeys.
Yes.
Right. Yes. Psychedelics.
And I think when we're seeing gray aliens in those, I think that's exactly what's happening, because I think that is also something that is an altered state in which we're encountering these beings. So the shamanic journey versus being affected by some light that alters our consciousness, and we have this encounter with something possibly very real, but not necessarily alien in the way that we think of it as being extraterrestrial.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to throw out one thing sort of as a devil's advocate here, but I, as an artist, I'm not real big on painting and stuff, but I draw, and I used to draw a lot. I drew weird figures and stuff like that. You know, some weird looking funky people, but I would more often draw things that I've seen in the real world and try to recreate them than having drawn something that I hallucinated.
But
I've never done that.
A shamanic journey isn't necessarily a hallucination. And to the people of ancient cultures, that stuff was as real, if not more real, than this world.
Okay, yeah. So I see what you're saying. That there may be a cultural difference because we view them as hallucinations. We're like, well, they're not. They're just. This is something weird that happens when I eat these shrooms or whatever. Yeah. And they viewed it as like an actual encounter with other parts of this reality,
and which it may be.
Right. I guess I should take that back because I have tried to draw patterns that I've seen. But
yeah, you've agonized over those patterns.
Yeah, the patterns. So what is this pattern? So that is true. But I'm just thinking of like stuff I might carve or paint or, you know, a sculpture or something like that. That I don't know. I guess it's totally anecdotal. It doesn't really matter. But.
Right. I'm the same way. I've drawn plenty of. I've done a lot of drawing, and I've drawn plenty of figures and people and stuff. And my goal usually was to try to perfect the ability to draw the human figure as to draw something exaggerated and strange, usually. So, but that's just, again, it's anecdotal and personal, you know.
Now when you look at like the drawing in Palenque of Pakal's tomb's lid.
Yeah, that's a really strange one.
That is a really strange one because it really does look like a rocket ship with pedals and instrumentation and it may just be some kind of symbol of the afterlife. Maybe they had some concept of space flight without actually having it. You know what I mean? Like maybe a distant cultural memory because we did go to space a long time ago. Yeah,
I mean it looks like my impression of it, you know, just without knowing. I don't know that much about, I wouldn't call myself an expert in archaeology, but of course, I look at this and I see, here's a style that you can recognize across the culture, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a specific kind of style that's cultural. And then the artist seems to be attempting to depict something that he saw in that style. That's what it looks like to me. And that's why through my, 21st century eyes, it looks like a person in a machine.
Yeah.
And he looks like he's manipulating levers and, the position that he's in is very strange. And there's all these strange, it looks like a machine and it looks like it's just a machine being depicted in the style of that culture. So, I mean, you see that across plenty of ancient cultures. Some of the sites look like, foundations for machines,
Yes.
You look at Puma Punku.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was just thinking when you said that.
Right. Puma Punku is like this. I mean, even some places in the Great Pyramid, you're like, it looks like there was something mounted in the wall here. You know, there's a they call it a niche recess in the Queen's Chamber against the far wall, and it has a corbelled ceiling, and it doesn't seem to have any purpose. And they're like, well, this is some kind of this is a niche, and it probably had a statue in it. But you're like, really? I mean, it looks more like it housed a mechanism, and you can see this, in the foundations of buildings today. If old factories or stuff where everything's gone and all that's left is the concrete foundations, there are these footprints where the machines were, and they have all these strange holes and unexplainable shapes because it was holding the machine there. So I don't know.
The question then would be, what happened to the machine?
Right. No, they took it with them.
Yep. The aliens. Okay.
There's a place in Bolivia called the Samaipata megalith. It's not actually a megalith. It is it's a massive outcrop of rock. It's a huge outcrop of rock. So it's still attached to the ground, but it has been carved into all these strange shapes, and it looks. I mean, if you can get a good overhead view of the thing, you can see how you're just like, what is this for? It doesn't make any good shelter. There are all these strange recesses and holes and stuff in it, and it's enormous. And on the top, there's circular parts, and there's like a diamond pattern cut in, and there's two what look like ruts, like something was moving back and forth across this area. I mean, it is a very strange place, and it's just a big outcrop on the top of this mountain that's been carved, and it's enormous. So I look at stuff like this, and I'm just like, it looks like they had machines mounted here. I don't know what else to say about it.
So,
and I don't mean necessarily aliens. I think that there were advanced humans in ancient times, in very ancient times.
Yes, yeah. Well, let's look at the Mahabharata, because that is an interesting. Have you guys done a show on that yet?
We've talked about it many times. We have not specifically done a deep dive into it. We need to do that.
Well, it's a long book.
Yeah, it is.
But I mean, the stuff in there, I mean, that goes back. That's potentially one of the oldest written records of human history. As much as it's been mythologized at this point, like any of these ancient texts, whether it be the Bible or this or whatever, there's something to it that reflects something that really happened.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't. It's like so many of these other myths. We kind of talk about this, how they don't. In some cases, they don't sound like. I think Gordon White said this. He's like, it doesn't sound like something that's fun to tell around the campfire.
Yeah.
Right. There's too many numbers.
Oh yeah.
For example.
Yeah.
It's not fun around the campfire to have all these very specific numbers. You just like, there was a lot of warriors and they went to war. You don't say, well, there were 72 doors and behind each of the 72 doors, there was 144,000 warriors. And that made a total of, it's not, that doesn't make any sense in terms of sitting around telling a cool story around the campfire.
Well, that's sacred knowledge that we're trying to retain over a dark period.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the Mahabharata is like that just in its text itself. Doesn't it have like sacred numbers in terms of the numbers of stanzas or whatever they call them? Verses. Yeah, I think I've heard that or read that somewhere, that the number of verses and even the number of words and then whatever they call them, sutras. Mm-hmm. And the Mahabharata it's all sacred numbers. So
and there's an older set of texts too, aren't there? So it starts with a U.
Ooh.
I know it's only in Sanskrit. Let's see if my memory holds up enough for Google. Upanishads. It's the Upanishads. That's what they're called.
Okay.
And I think they're actually even older Sanskrit texts.
Upanishads, are looking it up.
And
expounding the Vedas in predominantly mystical and monistic terms.
There is there's a version on Amazon out of stock that was published in 1879.
Right.
But yeah, I think this text is actually older than the Mahabharata, if I'm remembering right.
Well, all these Vedas have unknown origins. I think that when you read the Wikipedias about them, they're like, oh yeah, 6th century BC and you're just like, okay, but that's based on when they think it was written down.
Yeah, exactly. They were oral before that.
Right. It was clearly fully developed before it was written down, and it was an ancient part of the culture even at that time. Even if that's even the first time it was written down, there's no way of knowing that.
Exactly.
And the people who are transmitting this knowledge and the people who are experts in it and have been for a long time say that it's much, much older. And I think that's, I don't know. I go to the source when you want to find out about this stuff.
And Google has decided that since I was looking through our Upanishads, that it would offer me up this jacket that is a Veda Max Classic leather jacket for $1,000. It's literally this random ad in the corner.
You got to get it.
Can I borrow $1,000?
Sure. We'll pull it out from the pyramid scheme. You can have
okay. But it's like, yeah, that's a little off, but good try.
Right. Yeah, that kind of annoys me. I can't think of an example right now, but when there's something like this that's related to some ancient mystery that I want to look up, when I look it up, I find out that a recent movie has been made named that.
Oh, yeah.
Something. Yeah. And that's all I can freaking find. Yep. And I'm like, I remember years ago reading about this in detail on the internet, and now all I can find are these stupid movie references.
That's why you tell Google -movie.
That's a great idea.
But yeah, that's happened. That's happened for me searching for albums. There was a band out of Canada who I had a single video from. They had aired it on Much Music. It was a local band. They were called Psycho Circus. So years later, I'm thinking, why have I never tried to find that? And so I look up Psycho Circus, and all I'm finding is Kiss, because it's the name of a Kiss album. And I eventually was able to do, Psycho Circus minus Kiss, and was still getting some Kiss, but eventually was able to find the album.
Yeah, you do minus movie, and then all you get are the Reddit threads, and then you have to do minus movie minus Reddit.
Yes, exactly.
Great pro tip, though. I appreciate that. I'm trying to use that.
But when you look at these texts, they're talking about some pretty high technology in there. I mean, the obvious one is Oppenheimer, quoting them. Was he quoting the Mahabharata? Or was he quoting one of the other texts?
Yeah, it was the Mahabharata.
Okay,
yeah,
describing the nuclear bomb going off the first time, because he's like, this was described in the Mahabharata. They had this technology.
Yeah, he said, "I am death, destroyer of worlds."
And you had everything down to the radiation sickness. Right,
and I think that's what Vishnu. Don't quote me. I know I always mix up these names of these guys. I think that's what Vishnu said when he took hold of this weapon.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, it might have been a different guy. Maybe it was Rama. But anyway, some guy in the story takes hold of this ultimate weapon that often is depicted as the Vajra. The Vajra is that thing that looks like a folded up lightning bolt in their hand. And he grabs it, and it's the now I am awesome. The sort of thing. He's like, now I am become death, destroyer of worlds. And it was Vishnu. Kyle just looked it up.
Okay.
Bhagavad Gita is the specific scripture. Okay. So that's from the Mahabharata, I believe.
And but it describes everything down to radiation sickness. And
yes.
I had heard, and I don't know if this turned out to be false information or what, and it might have even been in that initial Ancient Aliens book I wrote. Oh yeah.
You wrote it? Whoa.
Yeah, I wrote it in the future and then sent it into the past so I could read it. They were saying that there were certain cities in that area that they uncovered and had radioactivity to them.
Yeah, that would be the Indus Valley civilization.
Okay.
Specifically, what's the name of that place? It's called Mohenjo-daro.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, and there were several strange things about it. They call it the Mohenjo-daro massacre. I can see that Kyle's looking it up right now, but there were skeletons like laying in the streets. And some of the soils and the skeletons there were had like 50 times the expected. Everything has a little bit of radioactivity, right? So they had a much higher level. That doesn't really make sense, and also skeletons lying in the streets doesn't make sense, really. If people that are killed and are left lying in the streets by an army or whatever are picked apart by scavengers,
right?
Animals, and the skeletons are dispersed throughout the ecosystem. So you have to have like a catastrophic event that basically covers the skeletons almost instantly in order to preserve them in their state. Like think of Pompeii, Vesuvius, right? Those people were left intact, and often because they were covered. If they would have died there from heat or something, then eventually they would have been disintegrated by natural processes.
Yeah, so here's an excerpt from a story about Mohenjo-daro massacre on ancient-origins.net. It says, the objects found at the site appeared to be fused, glassified by a heat as high as 1500 Celsius, followed by a sudden cooling. Within the city itself, there appeared to be an epicenter about 50 yards wide within which everything was crystallized, fused, or melted, and 60 yards from the center, the bricks are melted on one side, indicating a blast.
Yeah.
So, what's the standard model explanation for this? A bowl-like meteor?
I don't know what the standard model is.
They mostly spend all their time debunking it, saying that this was old work done back when nobody knew what they were doing.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Isn't that often the explanation for the giants, too?
Yes.
Right.
Or that it was, Kyle calls it a hoax fad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a hoax fad amongst newspapers, right?
But yet there are entries in the Smithsonian Museum for giants.
Right, in their catalog, yes.
Yeah.
In their, yeah.
That was back before the Smithsonian knew what they were doing.
Well, I can't remember whose book it was. I was reading that whoever took over the Smithsonian in like the 1920s basically told them giants don't exist.
Yeah, Aldous Hurlicka. I don't know how to say his last name. Something like that. Yeah. Yeah. That guy, well, he was mad. He didn't like the yeah, that's not how it's spelled in some impossible way. It's got
He didn't like the biblical connections, wasn't that it?
And he didn't like that. So there was this predominant idea amongst the people, just regular people back then, that these mounds that were being found all over the place were constructed by somebody other than the current Native Americans. And he didn't like that. And he, and often that is taken from the Native Americans themselves, who said, yeah, we didn't build those, now, in some cases they did, or they added to them, or they buried their people in, or their ancestors buried their people into them. But many of them, they were like, no, these have been here for a long time. And they would say that they were built by the first peoples, or the old peoples, or the giant peoples, or the moon-eyed peoples. Like some of they give these strange descriptions of the people who their ancestors found living in these lands when they first migrated here.
Yeah.
So that guy, Aldous Hurlicka, however you say his name, he wanted to attribute all the mounds to the Native Americans, the current tribes. So, yeah, he didn't like the giant stuff.
And wasn't there an element, too, that he didn't want the giants associated, because giants are mentioned in the Christian Bible, so they didn't want to give validation to that either? Yeah.
Yes, that was part of it.
Because, I mean, that's kind of where the anti-flood stuff comes from in the 1800s, is that there was no worldwide flood, and that was because they were fighting off the idea that if science came up with a worldwide flood, people would be like...
It would validate the Bible.
Exactly, and then science would have been lost.
Right. Yeah, so interestingly, we've been going through Earth in Upheaval, which is my favorite book of Velikovsky's.
Yes.
A World in Collision was very interesting, but I really like Earth in Upheaval because he's just laying down the geological facts, as opposed to trying to speculate on, put together all these myths, which was also interesting. But anyway, so in Earth in Upheaval, and this is written in the 50s, and he's giving his perspective and doing it by quoting many other geologists and stuff. He's giving his perspective of the advent of the doctrine of uniformitarianism, which is the one grain of sand, one drop of water at a time. Everything takes place very slowly in geological in geological processes. The main thing that uniformitarian doctrine says basically is that all processes of the past must reflect processes of today.
Right.
In other words, you can't make up catastrophic things that we haven't seen acting geologically in modern times or since in recorded history. You have to compare everything that you see geologically to stuff that we know takes place, which I find to be a pretty short-sighted kind of, you're like, well, so if it hasn't happened in the past 200 years, it never happens. Right. Come on, guy. But that's basically what I was saying. But so it's interesting because Velikovsky says, and he's going through the writings of Lyell, Charles Darwin, and I can't remember the other guy's first name, Lyell, who was they were coming up with this uniformitarian idea, and it's Charles. Okay, Charles Lyell and Charles Darwin. So Velikovsky puts it that they were actually, there was something social happening. Velikovsky actually never mentions the fight between science and religion in terms of the uniformitarian stuff. He says that Lyell and Charles were from a period when, there were these enormous social upheavals. You had all these wars. You had World War I. There was this enormous social upheaval happening, and they didn't like it. And they preferred things to be peaceful and placid. And they didn't like these catastrophic upheavals that the first geologists, people like Cuvier, and Sedgwick, these guys, the original geologists, the people who started the discipline, were looking through the geological record and seeing enormous cataclysms. They're like, look, you can't move all this material without something enormous happening. So that was, I kind of went off on a tangent there, but I just wanted to point out that from some people's perspective, the fight between Christianity or between the religion, the church, and science was a part of this, but interestingly, there was also a big social thing that they were tired of social upheavals and they were looking for peace.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And of course, later on, the scientific community grabs onto this idea of uniformitarianism because it does completely, just the same way that they grabbed onto Darwin's ideas, because it does completely get rid of any necessity for or any connection to religious ideas. So
even if it doesn't completely work,
right? It doesn't work. You can look at the moon and see that enormous cataclysms take place.
Right. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly.
like Velikovsky says in the book, uniformitarianism can only be taught on moonless nights.
And even the moon, we have no working theory that fully explains why the moon is where it is.
Right. There was some, I think we've talked about this on your show before, but there was somebody that said it's much easier to explain why the moon shouldn't be there than to explain how it is there. Yeah.
It's easier to say it's a mass hallucination than to explain its existence.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's too big, it's too close. It rotates too slowly. It doesn't have enough mass, and none of the theories we have actually account for all of them. Some of them get us most of the way there, but they still require a little bit of. We'll just skip over this part, and there's the moon.
Yeah, right. Just ignore the fact that it doesn't match the. Yeah, it's the three-step plan to take over the world. Right. You just step 1, steal underpants. Step 2. Step 3, take over the world.
Right, exactly. Nice South Park reference.
Yeah. That's right. There's weird stuff about the moon that doesn't match. The idea that the moon was extruded from the planet itself way early in the planet's history from some enormous impact. I mean, right there, you have a uniformitarian problem.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
We're talking about a collision of worlds.
But that stuff doesn't happen anymore.
Right. Yeah. So how come
so much like the ancient texts, right? The gods don't come down and visit us anymore.
Yeah.
It's just not like that anymore.
How come they can invoke things like that way in the past, but say that they don't happen in the present? But then the uniformitarian doctrine says that you can't have processes in the past that don't happen in the present. I don't get it. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So the oh crap! I was just going to say something. It wasn't about the moon though.
Well, it's not.
Although the book "Who Built the Moon" is an excellent book.
Yeah, that book.
Who built the moon?
Who built the moon? Yes.
And you don't have to.
It is a good.
You don't have to go with their conclusion that the moon is artificial, but they put a lot of just science in there showing you why the moon is so unusual and why the theories don't work.
Right. It is a strange thing. It's way too big for this planet.
Yes.
It's the size of the large Jovian moons. That's weird. Mars is the only other inner planet that has moons, and those are little potatoes.
Right. Which
they're not even big enough to be spherical.
Which could just be left over from a collision.
Right. Or, they might have been caught by they have such weird orbits. They possibly are just recently caught by Mars from the asteroid belt or something.
Sure.
See, this goes back to Sitchin again. I love what the whole beginning of the solar system thing with Nibiru and the fight between Tiamat and Marduk or Nibiru or whatever, and that whole chaos situation where creates the hammered bracelet, the asteroid belt out of Tiamat's remains, and then a large chunk comes across and steals one of somebody's moon, Saturn.
No, I think it was that Tiamat was extruding moons that were generals to fight the war against Nibiru. And then Nibiru wins the war against Tiamat, destroys her, and destroys all of her other generals except for Kingu, who was her original biggest moon, now he's dead. And he's all beat up. Right. And then, that's just cool, man. Yes. I love that. Yeah, I really do. I think it's a great creation story, and it's a creation of the solar system. You know, like why do we have the system we do now? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And there's a lot of things in the system that just don't make sense. Things shouldn't be like according to the standard model of solar system formation, which is basically coalescing out of, large gases. First you have the solar coalescing, and then you have the planetary coalescence out of that, and there's other materials or whatever that you shouldn't in that kind of system. You shouldn't have retrograde stuff. Yeah. Yeah. Everything should be spinning and turning all in the same directions because the whole cloud of gas was all spinning and turning in the same directions. And that's another thing that there's sort of, I think, you have more and more, scientists saying, yeah, maybe it didn't just form out of gas. Right. Yeah. And they're saying that because that it doesn't work. Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, again, there's another fairly recent story, Science News, where this object, the most distant object that we've ever observed with one of our probes, the most distant probe, obviously, it's in the Kuiper Belt, and it's this peanut-shaped object, and they're observing this object, and they're saying, well, the circumstances that must have taken place for this object to have been formed in this way, this peanut shape, suggests the cloud collapse theory, as opposed to there's another one where it's just all the gas and the little particles are smashing together and sticking together and slowly getting bigger and bigger. Whereas cloud collapse is like nebulous materials, very thick, and they just slowly sort of conglomerate, and that's non-catastrophic. Right. So then you can end up with these weird oblong peanut-shaped objects that are right. Because if it was things smashing together, you can't have have shapes like that. Yeah. So we have a little over 10 minutes left here. What do you guys think of the idea of Mars having previous life? That there could be still stuff there, like the face on Mars, things like that. To me, we've been learning so much about geology. Especially working with Randall Carlson, doing the podcast with him and just seeing the world through his eyes, that it's clear, it's just clear to me that there are enormous water-carved shapes on Mars. Mm-hmm. You can see fluvial fans, you can see erosive features. And I know, like Electric Universe, people talk about, the Electric Universe idea thinks of Birkeland currents and other things. But I also, to me, whether that happened or not, you can still see big fans of material that have been spread out, and big channels that are cut by rivers. Yes. Yeah. So to me, the idea that Mars had lots of water, not just some water, but lots of water in its past, and it can't be too distant of a past. Yeah. Because all of those features would be very obscured, right? The older they are, the more worn and sort of they kind of start to vanish. Well, yeah, but they don't have much of an atmosphere on Mars either. Well, they have enough of an atmosphere to have enormous dust storms. True. And dust storms are incredibly erosive, right? Okay, fair. So I mean, you're right that the most erosive feature, the most erosive force we have on Earth is water. So there's not much of that left. Doesn't seem to be much water erosion. It's more like a desert. But deserts do face erosion, and some of it pretty quick from dust storms. Yeah. And so the fact that we can see some of these features is and they're not all of them are enormous. Like the what is it called? The Valles Marineris, the giant canyon on Mars. That's a huge feature, right? But there are small river channels and deltas and stuff that you're just like, okay, those can't be that old. So it's interesting. And as far as life, I think if a planet has water, it's probably going to have life. Yeah. Even if it doesn't have water, it could have life. I don't know. It could live on something else. And if it had water at some point in the past, it probably still has a lot of water in its interior. So the idea that there's life there now in the interior, I think is totally possible. Of course, our little rovers and stuff are not going to be exploring any caves. They're not spelunkers.
Aren't they working on that, though? Isn't that one of the next rovers is going to be going underground?
No, I haven't heard that. That would be really great. Do they have a cave entrance they want to check out?
I don't know. I vaguely remember reading the article saying that they were either going to start digging or they were looking at a particular cave they were going to try and investigate.
Okay, I was going to say, because I can speak from experience. You can't just land in a desert and look for a cave. You're never going to find one. I mean, you have to find them by luck. So if they better have a cave picked out before they send a rover there. They're probably not going to find a cave. But yeah, it would be really interesting if we could go down in some caves, because I'm sure that there are some enormous cave systems there. And the other thing is, Mars's rock. This is something that I don't see mentioned a whole lot, but Mars's surface stone is sedimentary. I mean, that's deposited by water. So,
well, I think less and less you're seeing resistance to the idea that Mars had water.
Right.
But of course,
right. It's just interesting when you look at the pictures and you see all the strata, and you're like, okay, that's sedimentary rock.
The question is, what happened to it?
Yeah. So, my idea, the thing that I have in my head, and this is the standard model story, is that at some point in the past, Mars lost its magnetic field. And once it loses its magnetic field, it loses its magnetosphere, which is what protects its atmosphere from solar wind. And then the solar wind starts blowing the atmosphere off, which is why Mars has such a thin atmosphere. And once that happens, the water starts to evaporate, because once the pressure drops, water will boil at low pressures. It'll boil without heat. So
low temperatures. Yeah.
Low temperatures and low pressure. So.
And of course, that all fits with the with Velikovsky's model that it came into a close encounter with Venus, and that Venus basically ripped its atmosphere apart.
Yeah, that's one way to think of it. That something came close to Mars and tore it up. It does seem to have large. There's something weird about how it's missing a big part of its crust.
Yes. And you see the electrical scarring, as you just mentioned. There's stuff that looks like it was water, but there is very distinct electrical scarring, which would have happened if the EU is right, the electric universe idea is right. If Venus got too close, they would have unleashed massive electrical thunderbolts between them.
Right. There would be the thunderbolts of the gods.
Yes,
right. There would be this huge, because each planet has its own electrical potential, and they would be equalizing. And those would be enormous bolts of electricity arcs. So, yeah. And it has plenty of craters, too. So, it's been impacted plenty of times since it's lost its atmosphere, because those craters are fairly fresh. So
True. And that could be
craters on.
That could also be stuff falling back onto Mars.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Some people think maybe it just got hit by something really big, and that's why it lost half of its crust. But those are all sort of outside the ideas of astrophysics, that's not a big deal. I mean, there are clearly, the moon is outside of the ideas of astrophysics, so it's not a problem.
And the thing is, if they were to find proof of advanced life on Mars, do you think they would tell us?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I think they would probably keep it a secret,
at least for a while.
Yeah. There's this interesting. I don't know. NASA does this thing where they sort of fail to comment on stuff.
Yeah. Well, wait a second now. Let's say before they found advanced life, they would most likely find other life,
microbial life or something,
less advanced life. So it could be a progression. You start finding the first remnants of life, plant life, animal life, and maybe just bacteria at first, and then going from there until we get more and more advanced missions. And perhaps by that point, some of the findings would be not too out of whack. People would have become comfortable and conditioned to the idea that, okay, there is life on other planets that no longer exists, but this is perhaps more normal than what we have, like at this point, are expecting.
Yeah.
So maybe it wouldn't be. I don't know. I'm just trying to be.
But so let's go the other way. If one of their rovers just came up over the crest of a hill and there was like the remnants of a megalithic structure,
yeah,
would they tell us? They're not finding life, but there's definite signs of life, and it was advanced. Right.
Yeah.
Again, I think you'd get the same thing. I think they piece by piece, you'd get it over a few decades.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And because
drip, 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 drip.
they're worried how people are going to react to it. And, being into this type of stuff, we're all like, we would love to know this. But I think the people who aren't into this, the very normal people out there living a day-to-day life, especially people who are very accepting of the religious creation stories and stuff, would be very disrupted by finding out there was advanced life on another planet.
Yeah, that's possible. I don't know. I mean, our mother is very religious. She would be fascinated.
Right.
by
No,
this.
some people would. And I think it comes
Yeah.
down to personality.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
But you're right. I think that there is a certain segment of the populace, whatever their backgrounds, religious or not, that would kind of flip out.
yes.
I think.
Yeah. And the other thing is, if there was life there, advanced life, and there isn't now, what does that say about Earth?
Right.
Yeah. Ancient aliens.
But
We are them.
well, that is a possibility.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a book somewhere that actually postulates that life here came directly from Mars.
Yeah.
I don't remember what
don't
it's
see-
called.
Yeah, I think that would be that could be a very interesting story. We're star people.
Martian Genesis from Herbie Brennan. The extraterrestrial origins of the human race.
Ah, I'll have to check that out. I haven't heard of that one.
I bought this a very long time. I don't know when it was published. Before I was doing this show. 1998. And
Kyle's distracting us with Mars pictures. Sorry.
Sorry.
on the back it says, unexplained fossils, evidence that people actually walked with the dinosaurs wearing shoes. Amazing ancient technology, how pyramids were lit by electricity. Lost prehistoric civilizations, how someone built a massive concrete wall in Oklahoma 312 million years ago. Life on Mars, when it flourished, what happened to it, and what it left behind.
I love that concrete wall story.
Yeah. And I know Scott Walter had come to the conclusion that it was natural, but I'm not 100% convinced.
Yeah, I don't know about that. Yeah,
Does it?
there were cubes.
What was that?
They were I mean, is it the same story about the guy who found the wall down in the coal mine? Is that the one?
Oh, I don't know.
Or is this on the surface?
Oh, yeah, you're right. This might be the one in Oklahoma they found the wall way under the surface. I'm thinking of the Texas wall.
Oh, okay, you're thinking of Rockwall.
Texas.
He did decide the rock wall was natural, but this thing down in the coal mine, I don't think Scott Walter's gotten to look at that one.
No, I don't think anyone has.
We actually interviewed a woman from Rockwall early on in the podcast. I mean, it was like in the
50s or something. Episode 50, 60.
that far. Man, I thought we was way earlier than that.
Maybe it was earlier than that, 30s.
But anyway, she grew up there. Her, she knew, like, their family has a ranch that's the Rockwall runs through it, and she has all this information just from growing up, and like the people in her family that excavated down and exposed the rock wall, and then had basically a tourist stop thing where people paid like a nickel to go down in and see, and they set up a big. I mean, it was really cool. There's a lot of really strange, interesting things about that feature.
And she sent us a lot of fantastic collection of old newspaper articles and photos and stuff that her family has collected, where when you look at we've gotten used to looking at geological features and sedimentary rock, which can sometimes be very layered and regular. Mm-hmm. But you look at this and you're like, nope, that somebody built that. It's not that's not natural, especially not in the formation that the common geological explanation is that it's what do they call it? It's
A dike or
a
something
dike.
like
Yeah, so like a crack forms in the overlying sediment,
Right.
and then other sediment fills it. Right. This is too regular for that. We looked up other examples of these kinds of dikes, and they don't look anything like the rock wall. They're not even close.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
And when Scott examined it, he examined a small part of what may have been the rock wall.
Right.
So it's like
Yeah.
it's like I would compare it to like ghost hunters going into a place for one night and coming out and going, nothing happened. It's not haunted.
Right.
yeah.
It's like, yeah, people have been having experiences 100 years, but you were there one night and nothing happened. So it's clean.
Right. This house is clear.
All right. Tell people where they can find your awesome podcast, guys.
Thank you. We are Brothers of the Serpent. You can find our podcast anywhere you can get podcasts. We are now even on Spotify, which is good. But yeah, you can find us brothersoftheserpent.com. That's our website. All of the old podcasts are archived there, but everything back to about episode 50 is in the feed. So that's where you can find us. We're also on YouTube. Just look us up, Brothers of the Serpent. So,
all right. Thank you so much, guys.
thanks, man.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
It's always a blast.
Where Did the Road Go is made possible in part by our awesome patrons. And for those of you pledging $10 or more, an extra special thanks. Allison Cook, Super Inframan, Tim, Stone Wilderness, Luke Osborne, Rob Drummond, Alex Whitcomb, Nadine, Damian Tallman, Edu Camahort, Tactical Therapist, Janet Bunderson, 36 Dingo, Maria, Jennifer Campbell, American Rambler, Kevin, John Rutledge Foster, Eric Citron, Andy McNamara, Sasha Jorg, Matthias Sunby, Dominic O'Malley, Christopher Vaughn, Riker and Stark, Sean Cosgrove, Jose A., Roger Gonzalez, Craig Cicernos, Ray Benedetto, Linz Jackson K., Alfred Tuttle, Kevin Schreck, Patricia Giaquinta, William Lovelace, Mark Brady, Chris is a hot dog a sandwich, and Carla Mahoney. Thank you all so very much. There is a lengthy Patreon extra segment for Patreons that will be up this week with the Snake Brothers, where we discuss Atlantis and I forget what else we get into. It's a conversation much like this one, going into a lot of different directions. Oh, we start with the Bet's Sphere, which we talked about a couple of months ago, and they did some research on it, and from there it just goes all over. So go check it out if you're a patron. If you want to become a patron, it's only $3 a month, and it helps us out greatly. Go to wheredidtheroadgo.com and click on the Patreon link. There you go. We'll see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible